The purpose of this video is to attempt to give an honest Christian answer to the question of atheism. And what I mean by an honest Christian answer is an answer that comes from within the Christian worldview, the Christian understanding of reality. And to me, the honest Christian answer to the question of atheism is that ultimately there is no one who truly is an atheist in the sense of uh, no awareness of God. From within the Christian worldview, God is assumed to be known by everybody. There's no attempt within the Bible ever to prove God's existence. It begins with that assumption that there's a God and that we are all accountable to that God because we know that God, that we are, in fact, constantly confronted with this God. As Paul would say to the Athenians in Acts 17, quoting Epimenides, the Cretan philosopher, in him we live and move and have our being. We exist in the reality that is God. That is, some have described God as being itself, which is not really the best way of describing it, but it does kind of help get across this Christian idea that God is not a being within reality. God is where reality is, and we are constantly confronted with God, for He's the source, the ground of all being, and He is everywhere being is. He is uh, constantly confronting us. And so, just from a Christian perspective, the way I experience a lot of these so-called new atheists, um, I experience them as people who are desperately trying to convince themselves that they're atheists, and especially in the way that they constantly seem to be trying to build themselves up. I think of that when they say, "Well, the brights, we're the brights." That's such a strange way of going about something by saying, because we're the brights, we're the intelligent people, therefore we don't believe in God. That in and of itself just comes off to me as someone who is a Christian as a sign that uh, they protest too much, that they're suppressing the truth of which they're dimly aware. Just became aware of somewhere the Harvard professor Steven Pinker said something to the same effect that people of a certain intelligence or again trying to it's just this really appeal to a sense of superiority and this overt appeal to something like that comes off as an attempt to convince oneself. But on the flip side, I think a Christian, honest Christian answer to the question of atheism also has to recognize that the conditions of our existence as they are uh, do lead to the life of struggle and at times doubt and a sense of a distance from God, so that there's this combination. It's not an either or, an an absolute certainty one way or the other. There's a deep certainty, I think, for the Christian that there is a God. But because we live not in the immediacy of what traditionally is called heaven, and we live instead in a world that is in a state of estrangement and alienation from God, there is this ambiguity and there is the struggle of faith, even in the midst of a knowing a God and of being confronted with God. There is within the life of faith the reality of the challenge of doubts. And so it's not an either or. And I would say there are some Christian apologists, let's say, that I find are on the other extreme, and they seem to me to be just the flip opposite of these new atheists, in that they do protest too much in giving their dead-on arguments for the existence of God. I would say a better way of looking at it is that these various proofs that they put forward serve to be clues and pointers to what we're all confronted by and confirm what we all deep down know, that there is a God. And yet that living in the light of that belief involves risk and commitment and courage and stepping out in an act of trust, and in that act of trust finding God present in that act of trust, even in the ambiguity of it not being the clarity of sight that Christians say we will have in heaven. So I think that to me is the honest Christian answer when it comes to the question of atheism.